we make of this Korea situation right now?
The Dan Yorke State of Mind program is brought to you in part by Lookout Rhode Island and Takeo Comfort Solutions.
Bracing for another storm. Really? We were getting very cocky when we got 55 and 60 degrees in February. I told you this is not reality, so we'll see what happens tomorrow night, and hopefully we're able to generate a brand new program for you. Sometimes we have all hands on deck when it comes to weather, so cross your fingers for that. A heck of a weekend for the basketball teams here in the state. URI, the 7th seed, almost pulled off the A-10 championship for the tournament, and PC almost pulled off the championship for the Big East tournament, but both of their efforts postseason now earned them seeds, 10 for PC, 7 for URI. I hope to get in a selection show, prediction show here before we get going on Thursday. URI has their game noontime against Oklahoma out in Pittsburgh, and PC's got noontime on Friday. So midday, lack of production in the local Rhode Island economy, I'm guessing, for later in the week. All right, let's get right to it. The North Korean situation is now dynamic at minimum. The Guardian headline here, and you could just pick from gosh knows how many. Here's the latest on a weekend package on what's happening.
After a spate of North Korean missile tests last year, another nuclear test in September,
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself.
and months of insults between President Trump and Kim Jung Un, this is an extraordinary turn of events. Do-yeon Kim is an expert on North Korea and its nuclear program and says the North is eager to talk because economic sanctions are hurting the regime.
It's not going to be easy because the North Koreans are very good negotiators and they know how to play the game.
What is the game that they play?
Get everything they want and give nothing in return.
The North's commitment to freeze missile and nuclear tests is reversible, and North Korea has reneged on previous deals dating back to the 1990s. 3 US citizens are still being held by the North Korean regime. The family of Professor Tony Kim says seeking his release should be a top priority.
Other sitting US presidents have decided against meeting with North Korean leaders and giving them the reward of legitimacy that goes with that, without getting concessions from them first.
Kim Jung Un, he seems to want to project himself as this bold leader of a normal, peace-loving nuclear power. So this upcoming summit gives him a good PR opportunity to portray that image.
Interesting perspective. Professor Genest and Professor Roehrig, both from the Naval War College, neither speaking for the college, both speaking for themselves. Get that up front. Korean expertise, security expertise, back and forth. Right. This is my envoy. I'm sending these two guys in. We may have more brain trust legitimately right here than we have coming out of the White House for this situation.
Low bar.
Huh? Well, I don't think so. I honestly don't think so. Welcome, guys. Question off the bat. Do you think this meeting will happen in May at all?
I think so, but there are question marks still. I think in particular, you have yet to hear any confirmation or corroboration of all of this from the North Korean side. I don't say that to doubt the South Koreans and what they have relayed, but the fact that nothing has come from the North Korean side yet about this, I think is very interesting.
I would agree. Also, if the Trump administration is under pressure to get some basic concessions before the meeting, that may break up the meeting.
How did this start?
Well, it began
once upon a time, North Korea, became a new country back in the, but right now, how did this start?
Well, we had a pretty nasty summer and fall leading up to November when they had a very serious missile test that created a lot of anxiety in the United States because of its potential range to reach the U.S. Then in Kim Jong-un's New Year's address, he offered the possibility of perhaps attending the Olympics, the possibility of dialogue with the South. The South Koreans were quick to take advantage of that, as President Moon had offered that earlier in his term when he began in May. The North Koreans had not responded. And so from there we go to the Olympics, to the meeting during that time, and then the meeting between North and South Korean delegates that then leads to the trip to Washington, and here we are.
What's your perspective on how we got
I have a simpler answer. The Kims have been outwitting the West now for 30 years. And it is amazing how Kim Jung Un, who really didn't seem to be the great diplomatic brain surgeon that he looks like today, by putting additional pressure on the administration, by getting into this, war of words with the Trump administration, everybody get nervous, and then all of a sudden putting the peace diplomat hat on and convincing the South that, hey, maybe we should have a meeting, and then he's going to do something unprecedented. He's going to actually meet with the President of the United States, which both his father and grandfather wanted to do but were unable to accomplish. So Kim is playing a very smart game right now.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, I think most people don't understand, or they should, that this is something that North Koreans have been trying to achieve for decades, and that is a meeting with the most important person in the world, the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America. President Trump joked again this weekend about being presidential, right? Walking around mocking at the rally, all that kind of thing. But this is what we're talking about in terms of presidentiality, aren't we? Knowing exactly what role you play and what kind of a high bar this is supposed to be, right? Am I wrong about that?
Sure, and again, I think you're absolutely right that the carrot of direct talks with the U.S. president is huge. And there's debate as to whether we got something or nothing out of that particular offer. Some would argue that at least getting a suspension of nuclear and missile tests was worth something, to at least have the North Koreans talk about
where do we have that guarantee?
Well,
other than
well, and absolutely
where
right.
do we know
Well,
that's
they've had all
going
the
on?
tests already, so they don't need any more right away.
Well, that's
and that could be it.
Well, that's the
why
question
he
that I
feels he
have
can
here.
do this.
Is there a chance, guys, that North Korea feels like they've accelerated to a level of nuclear testing that they've got enough capability to make them feel like they're in a new phase now?
Look, North Korea pursued nuclear weapons for two reasons. One, first and foremost, to safeguard the regime. That was the whole point. If you have nukes, the lesson since 1991 is the United States can't intervene. They had that, and now they're getting closer to be able to deliver nuclear weapons to the United States, which would be the ultimate deterrent. But the second reason is prestige, honor, which is what the Kims have been seeking now for 40 years. And now Kim Jung Un has that nuclear capability, and the meeting with the Trump administration is going to give him the prestige that he so craves. So this is a diplomatic coup, a real achievement on the part of the Kims, on the part of Kim Jong Un to get this meeting. And it's the result of what I call the ad hoc, off-the-cuff foreign policy, the lack of strategic vision on the part of the Trump administration, where Donald Trump says, okay, I'll meet, rather than looking and talking to the Secretary of State, SecDef, all of the people that he surrounds himself with who have a greater depth of knowledge of how to conduct foreign policy.
It makes perfect sense to me. This notion that Donald Trump more or less thinks he can meet with anybody and solve anybody's problem drives this notion. Is that like a complete disorientation or misunderstanding about what his role is supposed to be in this whole situation, given what Marc just presented as how this views in North Korea? I mean, most people think this is like the wow historical moment ever to be able to meet with Donald Trump and position themselves as some, in their minds, equal. We talked about this last time you came in, about whether or not we should just kind of say uncle on their nuclear capability and move on to some other kind of discussion. This is like the Whopper with cheese, saying
literally giving the offer for a hamburger.
Right? I mean, isn't it really kind of like exactly what Marc said?
I mean, it is a very important concession.
You guys are stumped. I mean, you came here, but you still seem stumped over this.
Oh, there's still a wow element to last week, given what happened in regards to inter-Korean relations, and then U.S. North Korean talks potentially. There are some things starting to come out in the press that indicate that the Trump administration may have had some indication of this possible offer earlier than just, you know, an hour before he sticks his head in the press room. There was a New York Times report that indicated it for sure may have been the day before, but even some indications that Intel was telling them this may be coming several days or even weeks before that.
Then he's off the hook, because that is definitely the definition of long-range planning. Well, more than a day, it could have been 2 or 3.
But I think my personal view is this is all certainly a surprise, and there is still a wow, and how well this was orchestrated and planned, you know, many questions about this. But that's done, and I think there is an opportunity here to perhaps push the North Koreans on a diplomatic front that I hope through planning and preparation can actually happen, but there are risks with all of this.
Well, we'll talk about that, what the risks are when you're running on instinct here. Stay with us.
And I think this was the most forward-leaning report that we've had in terms of Kim Jong Un's not just willingness, but his strong desire for talk. So I think it was really what changed was his posture in a fairly dramatic way that, in all honesty, came as a little bit of a surprise to us.
It seems to me that if you get surprised, you take a minute rather than seizing the moment, and that's my concern. There was no letter, by the way. Originally, there was a letter. Kim Jong Un wrote a letter that South Koreans delivered. That was the report. Doesn't seem like there's a letter. Mm-hmm. So there's nothing on a piece of paper that we can point to that actually reflects exactly what the North Koreans and Kim Jong Un want to do. So tell me what the risks are, and tell me what you believe. We just repeat the conversation we had during the break about what you guys are most concerned about here. Given that there's this chatter for a meeting, is it fait accompli? I mean, I asked you at the top, are you sure this meeting is going to happen? You're like, Is pushback from Intel, like you guys, across the country and across the world going to impact this thing and slow it down or stop it? Or is it absolutely going to happen, and now you got to make the best of a risky situation?
When you're making a prediction, you have to say, okay, who benefits? Kim certainly benefits by having Trump meet with him. Trump certainly benefits because it fills his narrative. It fulfills his narrative that I put a tremendous amount of pressure on these people, I talked tough, and now they're willing to negotiate. So because I think it's going to go through because it fits both narratives, and it's in their interest to do so. And remember what Churchill said, it's better to jaw, jaw, jaw than war, war, war. So negotiations in and of themselves are not a bad thing.
So the Twitter war that we were having, the Twitter war that we were having, you thought was real and you were worried about it.
Well, the Twitter war as a reflection of what else was being discussed in Washington, and I think we got as close as we have in a long time to the active consideration of military options, and that was very scary to me. I mean,
well, the very idea that we didn't and haven't, based on these missile tests and the rhetoric being elevated, is a consideration to this thing unraveling completely, right? This has always been the worry. I mean, you know, a controlled strike of some kind would no doubt result in North Korea hurting South Korea, and then who knows what, right?
The art of negotiation is to get leverage over your opponent. And the Trump administration feels strongly, and there's some legitimacy to it, that they have now regained some leverage with their more aggressive rhetoric, but also maybe some of their maneuvers with the introducing of THAAD, which is the anti-ballistic missile system, into South Korea. So they've done some moves that are rather provocative, and that is putting some pressure on the Kim administration, and also the increase in sanctions. So from Trump's viewpoint, I have done what exactly I should have done. And now my opponent, the Kim regime, is responding in kind. So it's fitting not only his narrative, but good negotiating tactics. So there is something to be optimistic about.
Is his narrative a reality?
Well, and I would come back to a point that Secretary Tillerson made in your lead up to this session, that talking about how Kim Jong Un's, I forget how he phrased it, fundamental position or fundamentals have changed. I don't think so. I think it is still highly unlikely that the North Koreans are going to give up their nuclear weapons under any sort of negotiated scenario. I think even with increased sanctions, I think that's unlikely. To me, the risk is how we then move from the likelihood that we are not going to achieve denuclearization to sort of what comes next. And are we going to be able to manage that in a way that gets the most we can without necessarily starting a war on the Korean Peninsula?
Well, denuclearization of the peninsula is different than denuclearization of North Korea.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
I mean, we got them there.
No.
No, but they're under our nuclear umbrella.
I mean, we have the capability to fire from close.
Sure.
We got ships.
Yeah.
I mean, what? We can't rid ourselves of our own nuclear defense and or offensive capability in that region. So I don't know how you define denuclearization of the peninsula.
Well, I don't think you
just what's on the ground.
You can't talk about denuclearization. What you can do is what we did in the Cold War. It wasn't the nukes. It was the platforms that deliver the nukes. It was the missiles. And here you might be able to negotiate something with the North about their intercontinental ballistic missile capability. And if you can limit that, and so it's not a direct threat to the United States, then I think there's some steps that you can take to begin meaningful negotiations.
But what is the mission statement of the North? You guys have long educated me with your multiple visits here and on the radio, talking to me about regime sustenance is the exclusive objective of these guys. So if they downgrade their capability, they leave themselves vulnerable to citizens of North Korea waking up and saying, you know what, maybe we got to change the way we're doing business here, right?
Well, no, because the sanctions are eased. They get economic benefits as a result of an agreement with the United States.
There's no window here where we have some kind of Middle East type of moment where North Koreans actually wake up and say, we don't like this leadership, given that there's been a step back on nuclearization? Never.
Yeah, I doubt it. And
so you don't think if they downgrade their missile capability that they're putting themselves in jeopardy with their own regime protection politically?
I just don't think they will do that. Because, as you cited, that it is regime survival. I think they see that nuclear weapons and the ability to deliver those have become a fundamental part of their security planning.
Right. So is it a zero-sum game negotiating with them, trying to get them to do something that is a given they'll never, ever, ever, ever do?
Well, and that's what is interesting from what the South Korean statement was. They said that the North Koreans are interested in denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and said, and we feel that we don't need nuclear weapons if our security is guaranteed. Well, what does that mean? A lot of the speculation is that the North is going to pose several different demands that are just going to be unacceptable. That it is not only going to be removing the nuclear umbrella, but ending the alliance, pulling U.S. troops out of South Korea, and that is a non-starter.
The South Koreans don't want that.
No.
No, but there's a middle ground.
All right, the middle ground when we come back.
Okay.
There's a middle ground, thank God.
And I won't talk about it until
No, we're not. Not during the break. You get it first.
Well, it's an important first step, but it's going to be a long, long, long process. There has to be a real team of experts which can inform the president. He, in turn, has to devote a huge amount of time to understand these issues, not from a superficial standpoint, but from in detail, if these talks are going to be at all productive and successful.
Well, say what you want about the senator. Makes a point for a president who reportedly does not like to read his daily briefing. There's going to be a lot of homework, going on before he has a successful negotiation. What's the middle ground?
Well, the middle ground is if the North agrees to on-site verification of their sites, which is a big, big if, the United States can certainly enter into negotiations to formal ending of the Korean War. We can also guarantee that we will not invade. So there are certain moves that both sides can make that are short of denuclearizing the Korean Peninsula. And there's a lot of wiggle room. The problem is, if you get Trump and the North Koreans in the same room, let's hope that the president doesn't just agree on broad principles and then goes home, because the details are going to be incredibly important in these negotiations.
The thing that it seems to me, with his reality TV mindset, we've had 2 reality TV negotiations in the White House. We had one on immigration, and we had one on gun safety or violence. And we watched a guy literally play out a negotiation, and most of the people in the room looked just like you did, Terry. They're just kind of but then they had to engage, right? But if you look at the net value of what was done in those 2 sessions, there's very little that followed. But he does like to, he wants to be able to say he delivered something as opposed to be part of this long process, right? Sure. Are you worried about him actually being a hands-on negotiator in this situation? I'm petrified over it.
Well, and I think, you know, when you look at this process, it's been backwards. I mean, typically you will have a lot of lower-level meetings to talk about the details, have a lot of the tough negotiations occur at lower levels away from the cameras, and then when the summit comes, the deal's been roughly set.
Everybody says, well, you know, that's what we've been doing for decades and decades, and look where we are right now.
Good point.
Well, but that's, I mean, that's often applied to the Korean context. I mean, but I think in many other situations, that has been the typical pattern. Now, again, as your point is well taken, that perhaps we need to try something new, and maybe this is the jump start to get us moving in a different direction. I think I agree completely with Marc about the need for interim steps. I'm just not sure that we're there yet as a country to be ready to tolerate something like that. That's, again, what I was referring to is that the 10 years from now, where are we going to be at? It's going to be something in the middle, I think, but
haven't we been tolerating
we have to get to that.
The North having weapons for now 10 years?
Well, but now they can hit the United States, which is a different...
Yeah. 30 seconds. American public well-informed enough on this thing?
American public is never well-informed enough on important foreign policy issues.
Agreed. Where's Korea on the map?
Well,
that's why we have your show.
No, seriously. You feel a responsibility. I don't know.
Well, and they are complicated issues in many respects.
Oh, there's no doubt about it. Well, you know what?
To not...
so is national security and our way of life. It's not guaranteed. We'll keep the conversation going. Something tells me we'll be talking with these guys before whatever the May meeting is. Thanks for your expertise, fellas. Appreciate it. Final word when we come back. Stay with us.
Kushner.
So, programming note, we've got lots of snow coming in tomorrow night, so I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity with some expertise here remaining, and we're going to talk about some of the peripheral issues around Washington that do affect our security, you know, security clearances, that kind of thing, and all that kind of stuff. So, stay tuned for that. We'll get to a March Madness conversation hopefully on Wednesday. Thanks for watching. We'll see you on the radio tomorrow at 3 on WPRI. Good night.